All right, so today is called The Art of Life. And to kind of to begin this kind of idea of this sermon here, we got to talk about art for a second. We got to talk about art. Now, I'm a big fan of just art in general. Like I have my aunt is an artist for the state of Minnesota. My dad's a professional photographer. My mom is very artistic. Like I have just a lot of art in my blood, and I like to do graphic design and things like that. In fact, through seminary, it helped pay some of the bills. Helped is a strong word there on what I was doing. But like I love it and all that stuff. But all of you, and me too, have you ever gone into like an art gallery and you looked at a piece and you're like, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it means. I don't know why it's here. I don't understand like that. Have you ever had one of those moments before? And you're like, or some of you, I've probably heard from a couple people in this room about how, it's like, art's just blah, 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 it's just paintings and stuff like that, right? Like there's nothing there, right? And that's when you look, and this right here, the name of this painting is called The War News from Mexico. All right? And it's my favorite painting. And I know you guys are probably looking at that going, that's kind of a dumb favorite painting. Like it's just some dudes looking at a paper, right? Like that's what's going on, right? Like that kind of is what seems to happen. And I think that's the point right now. That's the point of this whole sermon. That's the point that Luke, in the Gospel of Luke, is trying to get across about Easter, about the resurrection, is that everyone misses the point of it. Everybody misses the point. But there's an art, but life comes in because God brings an art to life. Because art is like all this stuff. And I'm going to explain all this. I'll explain this. So the creation story. I love Genesis chapter 1 and 2, right? And I think there's two kind of Christians in the world. You have Genesis 1 Christians and you have Genesis 3 Christians, all right? And Genesis 1 Christians are kind of formed by the creation story. But what I think happens a lot, and some of you have heard me talk about this before, but I think happens a lot, is a lot of us become Genesis 3 Christians. And what happened in Genesis 3? The fall. That's when you discover that that we do mighty sinful things, that we're terrible. And sometimes we believe that is the actual beginning of our story. That we believe that the terribleness that we do is actually who we are. I was created as a terrible person, right? I was created, this is how God created me, that I mess up all these situations. And we believe that is our beginning. And I'm telling you today, that's not your beginning. Your beginning is in a song, in a poem at the beginning, right? It's a beginning, and some of you have heard me speak about this before, but I'm going somewhere here, all right? So Genesis chapter 1 begins with this song of the creation. You have the 6 days of creation, and we all have those memorized, right? We're going to go through those. But before that, I'm going to tell you that creation is a poem, it's a song, right? It's a song. Now, you guys remember when you were in school and you had to learn, like in middle school, you had to learn about poetry and you learned about meter? Remember like A, B, B, A? You guys remember that? Stuff like that? The song in Genesis chapter 1 is A, B, C, A, B, C. Let's go through it. Now, I need your help in that because this is a song. God is singing the creation into existence. And like every good pop song nowadays, there's a catchy little hook in between it, right? And that catchy hook is, it was good. So I'm going to need your help with those, all right? So at the beginning of the first day, God said, let there be light. And he looked at the light and he saw that it was, all right, hold on. That's correct. It's technically correct. But like, guys, when your wife looks at you and goes, how do I look? And you go, good. Is that good enough? No. you got to rub a little on it, right? So God, again, the first day, God said, let there be light, and looked over it, and he said it was good. There you go. You got it now. And then day 2, he separated the waters from above he called sky, the waters below he called the sea, and he looked at it and he saw it, and it was good. Yeah, you're hearing it now. And then third day, he pulled dry ground out of the sea, and all the shrubs and trees and grasses grew all over it. And he said, and he looked at it and he saw that it was good. Yeah, you're doing good now. And then day 4, right? He looked at the light that he created, and he created sun, moon, stars, all the heavenly beings that we can see. And he looked at all of those and he said it was good. And then he looked at the sky and the waters, and he filled those out with birds and fishes. And he looked at that and he said it was good. And then on day 6, he looked at the dry ground that he had pulled out, and he filled it out with all the things that creep, all the things that walk, and including us, which he created in his own image. And he looked at it and he said it was good, right? Like, that's the whole idea, is at the very beginning, he created you good. And as I was coming up in the church, I was taught that the creation is this blow-by-blow account. It's like, this is how it happened. And how boring is that, right? Like that's, I love now that I look at this and I'm like, you were created good, and you were created as a song, right? That you were saying, you were set in prose into existence. You were good, right? And you were created good. But the problem is that we sometimes miss that meaning. Sometimes we miss the art that is right in front of us, and we don't understand it. It's like going into one of those art galleries and just not understanding it. And God has created the art in life, but we walk into those galleries and we're just like, I don't get it, right? That's how I was when I saw my now favorite painting. Again, this thing's called The War News from Mexico. And I remember when I first saw it, I used to live in Bentonville, Arkansas, which is Walmart's hometown, for those of you who don't know. And the Walton family has bought and made this amazing art museum called Crystal Bridges in Bentonville, Arkansas. If you are within 200 miles of that place, you are doing yourself a disservice by not going into it. So all of you, if you ever go to Branson, go over to Bentonville for a little bit, or Tulsa or something like that. Go over there and go to this art museum. Let me tell you why. You know the $1 bill? You guys are familiar with that, right? The picture of George Washington, you know, that was created from a painting. That painting is in that museum, right? Cool, huh? You guys have ever heard Rosie the Riveter? She lives in Bentonville, Arkansas now, right? Like she's there. Like, there's stuff that you recognize. You're like, oh, I remember that from high school. Like this, I remember these paintings. All these huge, important paintings are there. And I remember walking through this hallway here, looking at all these paintings, and I saw this one. Well, not technically this one. This one's a reprint, right? I did not steal it to come here, but and I didn't really think much of it. I thought it was cool, but I didn't really think much of it. But then I started to notice things. This art museum's free to go to. I started to notice something. That out of all the paintings, like again, Rosie the Riveter is there, like all these really important, famous pictures, this one was the one that was always being borrowed by another art gallery in the world. This was the one that you would go and look at it, and like, here's the thing. Again, this is a copy of it. It's in color. It looks beautiful. Do you know what they do when it's on loan? Like when the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., or a big art gallery in Europe wants it for a little bit. Do you know what they do? They hang up a black and white copy of it on the wall. Why do they do that? I don't know. Anyway, but you'd go there and it's like, well, why is this one always getting borrowed? Does it mean something? Even though that I don't understand what it means, is it actually important? And I think that's what's going on here. So you have the women in our story today. They are going to the tomb. They've got the spices. They've got everything. They are going to the tomb to see Jesus' body, to prepare it for burial, to put it, to finish it off, to say goodbye that one last time. They're fully expecting to see death in there. And when they look in there, when they look in the tomb, they don't see anything. Like the body's not there. And like in the other Gospels, their first reaction is, someone stole the body. That's not good. Something's not good. And then all of a sudden, two guys, like just that are bright and shiny, surround the women. They surround the women and they says, why are you looking for the dead amongst the living? Like think about what they say there. Why are you looking for the dead amongst what is alive? Like, I read that with like fresh eyes this last week when I was preparing for this sermon. Why are you looking for the dead amongst what is alive? Like that's just it's what I do, right? When I look at these things. But the women here, they hear the proclamation from the angels. They hear the proclamation from the angels there about what is alive, right? They hear this proclamation here, and then they're like, oh, this is great. This is great. And they run and tell the disciples. They run and tell the disciples. Now, let me ask you a question. See if you were listening. When they went and ran to the disciples, what was the disciples' reaction? They didn't believe them. Like, listen. Chauvinist, right? Like, listen, these women see this and they run back to like, Jesus is alive. These angels came and told us. And these guys were like, that's a cute story and all, Mary. But I need to tell you, I need to mansplain to you what's going on right now, right? I need to tell you, they didn't believe him at all. Not one of them. Because women in that day and time their testimony to anything didn't amount to anything in that day and time. It was a rough time for them. But what I love about it is that is the gospel in the nutshell. That is a mustard seed moment. That the first people to announce the resurrection of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ were not the disciples as we normally understand them, but were those women. For a short time there, the very first proclaimers of the gospels, the first preachers of the gospel were these women that were saying, he is alive, that he is risen. He is risen indeed. Hallelujah. I almost got you on that one. But they were the first ones. They were the first ones. And for us in today to miss that point would be to be missing the entire art of life that is happening here, is to be missing that whole thing that the women there were proclaiming the birth, and the disciples completely missing it. In fact, the story continues going on there, that there's this story about these two men going to the road to Emmaus, and they're walking down, and the story is kind of strange. Jesus just suddenly appears kind of behind them, and the way they make it sound is that he kind of runs up behind them, and he's like, hey, what are you guys talking about? And they're like, as they kind of kick a pine cone, And they're like, man, don't you know any of the news? Like this guy that we believed was going to be the Messiah, that he was going to change the world, that he was going to be the one that was going to redeem Israel, that we believed that he was going to be the one that was going to save us, they crucified him. And then they say this, and this is so telling. Some of the women that travel around with us, they told us some stories, but we don't believe them. Read it. That's basically what they say, right? Like they have the gospel being proclaimed to them. The art of life is completely in front of them, and they can't see it. In fact, Jesus is standing there, risen, right in front of them, and they can't see it. They know for a fact that Jesus is dead, and they can't even see that he's alive. Man, that describes my own life so much. that I just let the bad day, I let the terrible news, I let the news cycle declare how I'm going to feel about my neighbors that may feel differently than I do. Rather than saying, Jesus is alive, I'm forgiven and they are forgiven. Right? Like that we do that motion all the time. So Jesus begins to preach to them. He begins to tell them about the prophets and the Old Testament laws and how they all pointed to Jesus. And they probably were like, okay, that's cool. That's cool. They're like walking along. It's all right. And they get to one of the guy's house and the guy's like, these have been some cool preaching that you've been doing here. What'd you say your name is? Like Thaddeus or something? I don't know. But would you like to have dinner with us? We'd love to have dinner with you. And Jesus like, yeah, I'd love to have dinner with you. And they go in and have dinner. And then all of a sudden, this happens. Here, I actually have it written down. I have it written down. Here we go. And then this happens. And when he was at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it and broke it and gave it to them. Does that sound familiar? He took the bread, blessed it, broke it, and gave it to them. It sounds like communion, right? It sounds like communion. Suddenly, he's not explaining anything. He's not explaining anything. He's just giving to them what we understand as the sacrament now, right? And suddenly, their eyes were opened like the blind men that Jesus had healed all throughout the gospel, right? Suddenly, their eyes are open, and they recognize him, and he disappears. Like, think about that for a second. Like, we so often want to prove our faith within an inch of the doubt. And Jesus tells them all the stories about everything that's going on in his life that brought him up to that day. He breaks the bread, breaks it. They recognize him. They're like, oh, it's Jesus. Where'd he go? Right? Like, that is the most mustard seed gospel moment I've ever heard of. And it's the way God works, because God brings an artfulness to the creation, brings an artfulness to our lives, brings an art to life, right? They suddenly recognize him as soon as he does the artistic, like, communion. They suddenly like, oh, there he is. Where'd he go? Right? The art of life. And I think that's what's going on. Like, Easter starts with these women. With these women were the first ones to proclaim the gospel. They were the first ones to say, and no one believed them. But here's what's beautiful about it. Even though no one believed them, it still happened. It still happened. Listen, there's going to be some times when life is so hard that we can't see the next day. In those times when you can't see forward, when you cannot believe in the resurrection story for your own life anymore, when you can't see the next thing, God is still working for you, and he's saving you. In fact, Jesus said beautiful things like, look at the little squirrels that scurry around. Look at the lilies of the field. Look at the birds and how they reap and sow. Like, look at all of these simple things. I mean, look at Easter. We have these beautiful lilies up here. We're in South Florida. Look how green it is here all the time. I was up in Minnesota a month ago. It's depressing up there this type of year. Everything's dead. And just white stuff is around everywhere. It's awful. But we're seeing that the creation is constantly reforming and renewing, right? Look at how God is bringing about new creation in this artful way. Look for it. It's there. So I talked to someone about this painting, and I found out what it's about. This painting was painted in 1850. 1850, 10 years before the Civil War, the Emancipation Proclamation. What, 70, 80 years before women's suffrage, right, in this country? And that's what this painting's about. 1850, and it's all about who's in charge. I got it on the screen. I'll show it to you there. Look, it's about who's in charge. I won't go into all the details, but it says the American Hotel on top of it. It's about here. And it says, and it's showing everyone that's in charge. All the white guys are on the porch and are in charge, right? And there's a black guy who's sitting on the step of the porch, but he's not standing. And there's a white woman that's inside the building, but she's not on the porch. And when I looked at that, it was like scales fell from my eyes. And I went, oh. And I went, I want my life to be like that. Because what this guy is doing is he's pointing out the darkness and going, the light's over here. Hope's over here. He's pointing out the darkness, and he does it in such a benign, normal, almost boring way. And it's weird that I want to be like that myself, where the outside here is this benign, normal, almost boring person, right? And yet, I want to be one who's always pointing out where the darkness is and going, the light's over there. Hope is found over there. I know that you're in your bad days sometimes, but the light is still there. You may not understand the painting. You may not understand the art. You may not understand what God is doing sometimes, but He is still bringing about light to you and calling it good. So you could say the seventh day of creation, right? That after He looked at it all, and He looked at all of us, and He said, it's good. And then He rested. I invite you to rest because God has made you good.